What's your first reaction to the news that we are going to be seeing a change in the rules around the police rules for stopping and search? Do you welcome the loosening of those rules to allow more stop and searches to go ahead?
I have no problem about stop and search if it's used in an intelligence-based way, working closely with the community, because stop and search is a blunt tool that is sharpened up by community intelligence. So the more trust and confidence you have in the community, or the police, the community having the police, then you will see more intelligence. And if you're making them feel more safe and secure, they're more likely to not only give you information and tell you what's possible and where the feuds are, but also more chance of them challenging their own youngsters and other people. Say, listen, don't carry a knife. Let the police deal with it, because there is that relationship. And where you have had a cut in community officers and safer schools officers, and those ones that build bridges for the community, you're finding that disconnect, and you're starting to see less information, less trust and confidence, and more weapons being used.
I mean, this is the difficulty, isn't it? I mean, Benjamin Butterworth was saying, a young white man, he's saying, well, I'm not going to get searched. I'm a middle-aged white woman. I'm not going to get searched. But isn't it the case that actually, if Benjamin was a teenage white man and he was living on the sort of housing estates where we are seeing a lot of these stop and search, a lot of these stabbings, he probably would get searched. Is it now? There's no doubt at all that we have had racism in the police, and there will always be racism in the police to a certain extent, in the same way there is racism in society generally. But in terms of the targeting of young men of ethnic minorities in particular areas, a lot of that is down to the demographics and the local population, rather than seeking out, young black middle-class boys living in, say, leafy parts of Surrey. They're probably not being targeted because they're not living in areas with high knife crime. Is it not the case that there have been areas of high knife crime in certain key cities, London being one of those, but it happens around the country, and that the police are targeting the people who are most likely to be carrying the knives? And in these cases, they happen to be the local population, who happen to often be of ethnic minority. Is this therefore people often talk about stop and search being racist. Is it a racist policy?
No, of course not. But, no policy is actually racist. It's how it's being interpreted and how that power is being used. Because if you are very clear on the intelligence, whether it's Section 1, stop and search, excuse my fluffing today, and also the Section 60 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, if they're being used with direct intelligence and current intelligence, then you will be stopping the right sort of people. I don't think anyone has any objection from being stopped and searched if the officers are giving them clear grounds for the stop and search, what they're looking for, and working with that person with respect and dignity. Then, because I've been stopped and searched, admittedly, after I retired in 2013. But, as long as the officers are being respectful and treating you with dignity, I think everyone understands it, especially if you say, listen, I'm stopping you to save your life. So, and those of others. So that's the emphasis we're there, to stop knives being used and lives being saved.
But I think that's where the advent of body cams is very important for police officers. We know there's quite a lot of evidence, and not only do we have fewer accusations of bad behaviour by the police, or of the police then as a result of body cams, but also, we think that everyone just behaves a little bit better when they know they're on camera, whether it's the police officer or whether it's the person they're searching. And that's the key thing, isn't it? When you're being searched by a police officer, you're not a criminal. You're just being searched. And therefore, you should be treated as respectfully as a citizen of this country. At the point when a knife is found, then you're a suspect, and then it's a different matter. But the reality is, I think a lot of people can, from the outside, say, as a white middle-class woman, I can say to myself, if I thought it would save lives, I'd be quite happy to be searched all the time. The reality is, that doesn't happen to me. And I've spoken to a lot of other young black men who say, when you're searched twice a week and you're treated like you're a bit of dirt on the bottom of someone's shoe, and in an aggressive, unpleasant way, you are going to start feeling resentful. It's understandable that there will start being those community tensions.
Absolutely. I mean, to be quite honest, I remember my son's getting stopped just down the road at the tube station and they literally just left the house, gone to the tube station. Admittedly, it was on the Terrorism Act, Section 44. Now, the point is how they were treated, and they felt terrible. And the way they were pulled out the line, going into the tube, and the way in which they're being drilled and interrogated almost. And they called me immediately. And in the end, they got an apology because the way in which, well, how many people, one, I've got the time, the inclination, or even the context to say, listen, I have not been dealt with.
How many young black men have got a retired police superintendent as their dad?
Well, exactly. Well, I was a current superintendent at the time. And that's why I'm saying a lot of people don't have the time, inclination, or even the context to get that sort of address. But it meant a lot to my son, and they understood a bit more around why they've been stopped. But the whole point is I don't want police to be dragged into being a tool for the Tories to get their hard-on crime credentials and using the problematic punitive initiatives, whether it's use of policing and stop and search, or even in the prison system. We're going to build more cells and house more people, because if you don't deal with the causes of crime, then you are not going to be as effective in stopping crime itself.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, actually. A lot of people are saying, look, this isn't going to tackle the real problem. And again, a lot of young people carry knives, but it doesn't matter whether they're searched by the police. They're not afraid of the police. They're not afraid because they're not going to get sent to jail. Everyone knows that isn't what happens. But the interesting thing is that the stop and search has actually been on the rise. In 8 of England's largest forces, the use has doubled in the last 2 years because the then Home Secretary Sajid Javid had eased the use of those Section 60 powers, effectively allowing officers to stop and search anyone in certain areas with reasonable suspicion. So no specific allegations involved. So while stop and search increased, we also saw knife crime increase. So there wasn't a correlation in terms of that going. So what? Just finally and briefly, if you could, Leroy Logan, what would actually solve knife crime if it's not this?
Well, let me just say, there's never been any evidence to show there's a correlation between stop and search going down, knife crime going up. There's been certain coincidences, but there's nothing to directly say. But I think, like everything, bring back our community cops, build back those relationships, bring back our safer schools officers, because that keeps the dialogue going, reduces resentment, gives the more a flow of intelligence, and safer communities are stronger communities, and they actually police themselves. If you're disconnected, driving around in your blue lights and your sirens, you are not doing what you're supposed to do. As Sir Robert Peel said when he set up the Met in 1829, the police are the public and the public are the police.
Now, as you're a Conservative MP, as your new party leader, I'm going to guess you're going to be rather supportive of this. And we're going to be obviously talking to the Justice Minister, Robert Buckland, or Justice Secretary, a little bit later as well. But I just want to know, which of these measures that have been announced do you think are going to be the most, the ones that are going to do the most work?
Well, I think they're all welcome measures, and I'm really pleased, actually, that we've got a Prime Minister who is putting a criminal justice policy really at the centre of things, because the last time that happened, I think, was David Cameron in about 2015-16. So I think that's good, and I'm really pleased that we're getting more money into the system, into prisons in particular, because the Justice Committee has said repeatedly that we need that. You may have seen this morning, also, I think, good news, more money for the Crown Prosecution Service. Again, something we've been calling for. So that's good. The question mark is going to be, how do we use that money most effectively?
Well, this is it, yes. I mean, there's certainly, we know that criminal barristers have been crying out for more money in the criminal justice system. We know that a lot of cases are just falling by the wayside because they haven't even got the barristers to represent some of these cases. But why has the criminal justice system, why has this all been allowed to sort of atrophy in the way it has? We've seen, obviously, legal fees going down. Yeah. Again, a lot of people might say, well, what problem is that? It's actually, if you can't get barristers to do these jobs, the criminal justice system does collapse. Long waits. We've seen an awful lot of plea charges just to get these cases over and done with. A lot of people who have been charged with some really nasty, very, very serious violent crimes getting away with just sort of cautions and suspended sentences, because we all know the judges are being told, look, there's nowhere to put these people. You can't give them a prison sentence, even though we are told as members of the public, someone's caught with a knife, they get 5 years behind bars. Well, we also know they absolutely don't. So is actually just strengthening the criminal justice system, spending more money on it, creating 10,000 new prison places, is that going to actually lead to a difference on our streets?
Well, It can do if it's part of a much more joined-up policy. And I think that is one of the problems, Julia, that for decades, really, we've looked at all of this in a rather piecemeal fashion. When you think about it, the signs of people who are going to be in trouble with the law often come before they actually even get into the criminal justice system to start with, which is where I think your point about what do we do when with youth centres and other things, how do you pick up on this in the education system and the health system, is very important too. So that's all part of it. But we do need more money in the prisons because the current prison estate is very old, it's falling apart, and prison's got really three purposes, hasn't it? It's got to punish people for the wrong that they have done, and I don't have any problem with that. And in serious cases, that does mean serious punishment. It also means protecting the public. It also finally means, wherever you can, turning people's lives around so they don't reoffend again. Now, at the moment, prisons are, in many cases, ageing. They're overcrowded. They haven't got the facilities where you can turn around those prisoners. And it's the majority, actually, who do want to try and reform. And therefore, you've got a vicious circle. So the investment is really needed. You've got to have the prison safe for a start before you can even start doing the education, getting people off of drugs and so on.
Well, we know we've lost a lot of prison officers, and often they can earn better money and without facing violence every single day by working in the local airport, doing dealing with the baggage carousels. I've actually known this in one particular prison. Everyone's just left to go to work at the local airport. Yeah. But given the violence levels that we're seeing in prisons at the moment against other prison inmates and indeed against prison officers, given the overcrowding, given the number of drugs and potent drugs we are seeing in our prisons, is it possible right now to turn that around? Have we kind of just lost control to a point where it's going to be difficult to sort of claw it back?
It can be turned around, but I don't think it can be turned around overnight. I think we've got to be honest with people about that for the reasons, again, that you set out. That's why I think, because it would take a time, for example, to get these new prisons built, we do need to have a really serious policy about retaining as well as recruiting prison officers. Again, something our committee's called for. You've got new officers coming in, as you say, sometimes they don't always find it's the job that they wanted to do, but also the experience, the long-serving hands, people often who can quell down a disturbance in the prison because they're used to dealing with people like this. They've been lost, so I think that's really important. And the other bit that we could do, as well as making sure that there is the space to keep people who commit dangerous crimes, serious crimes, that's what the public really worry about, as you were saying, that they're kept inside in proper conditions for a decent period of time so they're not a threat. We do still clutter up the prison with an awful lot of people who in many respects are sort of really right there because they're pretty inadequate in a number of ways. They're perhaps repeat petty offenders, and what drives that is problems with addiction, maybe drugs, maybe alcohol, maybe mental health issues. We don't have the facilities to deal with those people robustly outside prison.
But again,
so there's two sides to that coin, I think.
We often hear this from prison reformers about this, that people in there who don't need to be behind bars, they're not violent and petty criminals. But again, I talk to local shopkeepers in my area. They know the police won't even turn up if someone's stolen something under the value of £100. But you know what? Quite a few of those during a week, that's your profits gone if you run a local newsagent or a local small store. And actually, it's a very big issue. And what might seem as like a petty crime when someone is looking at murders and rapes doesn't feel like a petty crime when it's someone's personal livelihood that's being attacked in that way, whether it's run a small business or it's just something stolen from your home. And actually, what will deter these people? If they don't pay fines, they haven't got the money to do it. Other than a spell in prison, a slap on the wrist isn't going to make any difference to these people, in which case, at the very least, when these people are behind bars, when these are people who are committing dozens of petty crimes, as we call every week, at least when they're behind bars, people are safe from their crimes. Well,
unfortunately, the evidence, though, really shows that when that happens with those very short sentences, they actually are more likely to commit more crimes when they come out.
But again, why are they short sentences?
That's not actually logical.
No, but the argument seems to always be that short sentences, you can't do anything with these people. Well, that's an argument just as much for long sentences, isn't it, for these people? That actually, I don't want to 3 strikes you out like America, because people make mistakes.
Wouldn't it? Yeah.
But we are still in a situation where, at the very least, giving the local community a respite from these people for a few years rather than just a few months.
Well, that, I think, only works if you think that there's no other alternative. A lot of that judges and magistrates will say to me, look, I end up sending these people to prison because, in fact, we don't have the alternatives, which we ought to be able to do in modern technology, with much tougher tagging, if you like, much more rigorous and, if you like, more intrusive into their lives type of probation and drug supervision.
Okay.
You don't have those, and the irony is, all the evidence shows, not just in this country, but in Europe and in many parts of the States as well, that works better. And, of course, it's a lot cheaper. So I'm all for making sure that we don't get petty offending. It's a bit like the old glass windows theory, isn't it? If you don't deal with the petty stuff, then the big stuff escalates. But what I'm saying is we've been tending to use a bit of a sledgehammer to crack that nut. Okay. And so that clutters up a system. And it's not being softer on sentencing, it's being smarter about sentencing. Okay. I think that's what we could use this as a chance to do.
We're told this is a big kickstart to reforms to the criminal justice system. A lot of people are saying, that Tories need to return to being the party of law and order. But is these extra 10,000 prison places, is that going to be the difference between us feeling safe on our streets and us not?
Well, I certainly think it's a really good start. It's great to see the Prime Minister focusing on criminal justice so early on in his premiership. Julia, over the years I've felt that the criminal justice system has been a bit of a Cinderella. It's been sort of forgotten about or not talked about enough. And I think the focus on criminal justice this week is a really welcome emphasis of the importance that he places upon increasing confidence in the system amongst members of the public.
Well, there's been quite a concern about scrapping of jail sentences under 6 months. And at one point, I think there were even leading Tories talking about scrapping jail sentences under a year, given that people often don't get those sort of jail sentences until they've committed quite a lot of what people might call petty or minor crimes, but don't feel minor or petty to the people who are the victims of them. That will be very much welcome. But are you going to actually, even with these 10,000 extra prison places, are you going to be able to actually imprison the people who would normally serve these short sentences, and indeed the people who are no longer going to be released halfway through their jail sentence?
Well, look, it's a good question to ask, and I think the truth is that we shouldn't be fixated about targets or numbers when it comes to prison sentences. Each magistrate or judge has to make a decision based upon the merits of the case. I think the extra places will not just increase numbers but also allow the prison authorities to do more constructive things with prisoners. There's no doubt that overcrowding leads to less purposeful activity. If we can get prisoners doing work and doing educational courses and the sort of rehabilitative stuff that reduces victims of crime, reduces reoffending, then that's got to be good for the system and good for the public.
Well, I mean, that's all very well and good, and many of us who think that actually the first job of prisons obviously is to punish, but absolutely would want rehabilitation and re-education. The reality is, even with 10,000 extra prison places, even if you replaced all of the prison officers who've been lost to the system, you still won't have enough to actually tackle those issues.
Well, look, it's a challenging environment, but I'm glad to say that we have increased the number of prison officers since that low point. We've now got an extra 4,700 since the middle of the decade, and already the work that they're doing with individual prisoners is bearing fruit, dealing with prisoners' issues and actually engaging and managing prisoners in a more constructive way. That will increase safety because a lot of our prison officers are on the front line. A lot of them are facing huge dangers, and the prison environment is a really difficult one. But I think the new programme of additional places, plus the announcements that have been made about more money for prosecutions today, shows that we are taking a coordinated approach to criminal justice. Rather than just looking at policing, we need to look at the effects downstream, and that's why more money for prisons and more money for the system is absolutely welcome.
And how long is it going to take for us to actually see this tanker turn around? Even if this does work, how long until we've actually got those prison places, got more of those people behind bars, perhaps being able to start rehabilitate them, if that is possible? What year can we say, that's the year, benchmark year, we can judge whether or not Justice Secretary Robert Buckland has succeeded this?
Well, look, my work will never ever be fully done, but I can say that the new prison process, the new prison building process, will take place over the next 5 or so years. So we're looking to the mid-2020s to get these new places sorted out. I'm also very keen to make progress on the other end of the system to make sure that we have robust community sentences and that the probation service is working at full pelt in order to deal with offenders in the community for the, shall we say, the less serious end of criminality. But the review that I'm conducting, having been asked to do so by the PM, is all about serious violent and sexual offending and this question of automatic early release. Is that the right approach? Can we do better in terms of improving the incentive system to get prisoners to make progress and to behave in a better way and to ultimately be in a position where they pose less of a risk to the public? I think those are legitimate questions we need to be asking, and that's the review that I'm going to be looking at over the next few months.
And what would you say to those who say, look, this is knee-jerk stuff, this is appealing to sort of the Tory Blue Rinse Brigade, lock them up, and actually many of the criminal barristers I've spoken to said there's no evidence that longer sentences actually deters people from committing crime?
Look, this is about my approach to what I call smart justice. I was a criminal barrister for 20 years. I was a judge. I bring 30 years of experience into this job, and I'm going to try and use that to the best of my ability. I want to see a system that is truly responsive to the need to punish, to protect the public, and also to reduce reoffending. Now, if we can crack those three issues, then I think we're going a long way to enhance and improve confidence in the system. That's what we have to focus on relentlessly. That's what the PM wants to achieve, and that's what I'm going to work to do as well.
This idea that, look, a lot of people have been saying we've had this horrible spate of knife crime on our streets, not just that horrific case of the police officer who was stabbed end of last week, but also again and again we see young teenage boys and girls stabbing each other. Lots of people fear that actually we've got too many young people carrying knives routinely. Stop and search is the way to prevent that. People are afraid of getting caught, facing a penalty, so they're less likely to carry knives, less likely to use them, and we'll see knife crime go down. What's not to like?
Yeah, I think I should start by saying we're not anti-stop and search. I just want to put that out there from the first instance. What we are is about evidence-led policing, and in the last 2 years we've had reports from the Home Office and the College of Policing and HMIC which have said that stop and search is contentious, and actually in regards to efficacy it's not effective for long-term measures for serious youth violence. So that's not a StopWatch opinion, that's actually government reports. So I think if we're going to adopt approaches, they shouldn't be based on populist rhetoric or emotion. They should be based on factual evidence. And we know that with stop and search, 7 times out of 10, you're not likely to find something. And under a Section 60, the arrest rate is about 5%. So 95% of the people that are stopped are actually innocent.
Yeah, I mean, and this is certainly the key issue, isn't it? But in a way, and how are you going to know which young person is carrying a knife unless you do actually search them? That's the argument from the police, isn't it?
No, the argument is, for me, that actually it's not right that police officers are able to stop people with impunity. You should have reasonable suspicion, and that's what PACE, Section 1 of PACE, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, provides with, and that was the whole point of bringing that legislation in the 1980s, was because we had unfettered police officers stopping anybody that they liked, and that caused a lot of community tensions. If we've learned anything over the last 20 years since the Macpherson report, it should be that policing needs to be evidence-based and not put in the hands of politicians who are trying to be tough on crime. I must say these measures aren't anything new. The former Home Secretary introduced these. We haven't had an effective review of the pilot. The pilot wasn't finished. It's now been pushed out without any independent research. This doesn't feel like it's about uplifting police powers. It feels like it's about popularising opinions. So
the popular consensus is this is the problem, so that's what they're going to do, whether or not it works or not. It's just what people are calling for. Now, this is the thing.
That is there's young people who are being stabbed or at risk by violence just by having people who aren't directly affected by youth violence, or let's not even say youth violence, serious violence, because you've got adults killing people. So let's not try and make it just about young people. And I'm very happy we've not spoken about race in this conversation, but I'm about to bring it in.
Well, yeah, I was exactly about to do the same, because this is the thing. The reality is, if we have, police officers on our street stopping and searching people, the reality is they're not stopping me. I'm a white middle-class woman. Even when I was in my teens, never once stopped by the police and searched, never fell under suspicion. Now, was it that I didn't live in the areas where there was a large amount of stop and search going on because of high crime, or is it because of the colour of my skin and my gender? And this is the issue, isn't it? It's all very well for people to say this will keep people safe. If you are, however, particularly a young black man or a young Asian man, and you're being searched twice a week, you're going to start feeling a little bit like you're being targeted.
Well, that's exactly that, and I think then what we do is damage the relationship, where those people who were innocent, didn't have anything on them, have now been and you say twice a week, for some people it's much more than that because of the high crime rate in their area. They don't trust the police, and that then causes them not to call on the police if they're victims of crime or cooperate with the police if they may have seen a crime. If we want to tackle serious youth violence or serious violence, we need to do more intervention and prevention measures. And that's not soft liberalism. It's about understanding there's root causes to this, and the knife crime or the incident that we see on the news is just the end result of it. Yes, we need to have officers that can investigate those crimes and apprehend the perpetrators. However, having blanket Section 60s on, London has 8 million people. So if there's a stabbing in one area, we're now having up to 800,000 people potentially affected by that. And we already know 800,000 people won't be. But unfortunately, I see free males, which is quote unquote the word for black males, will be impacted. If you're on your way to work, on your way home and you're stopped, yes, you may feel, oh gosh, this is for protection. I'm sorry. Sometimes police officers carry out stop and search in such a way that it's unprofessional. It's not.
Now this is the thing. Is it stop and search? And again, I can imagine. Again, it's the fourth time you're going seriously. You know, it's the same police officer. Even you're going to start worrying about why you're being searched. But is a lot of it about how it's done? I mean, for instance, I'd be very unhappy about stop and search happening now, given all we've known about what's happened in the past. If it wasn't carried out with body cams on, and you know what, if your body cam stops working, you don't carry out the stop and search unless you've got very good reason.
That doesn't happen, and that's very disappointing. So my background before I became chief executive of StopWatch, I was the pan-London chair for the mayor's office looking at community scrutiny over 32 boroughs. And I can say in some boroughs there is no community scrutiny. In some boroughs you have the chair being married to a former or serving police officer, which doesn't give the community any confidence that this power is being independently reviewed, that we have access to the body worn so we can see what's happening. So if we're going to be ramping stuff up, you need to make sure the accountability measures, the transparency measures are still there. And it feels as though we are going so far from intelligence-led policing. And as I said, for me, this is about personality, politics and perception. And the Home Secretary that's come in has done nothing more than really extend the timings. So they're riding on the back of what the former Home Secretary done, whilst I must say we are an apolitical organisation. We work across Parliament. But the legacy of Theresa May is being damaged in terms of what she did via the best use of stop and search scheme, which I have to say has meant the arrest rate under that scheme improved in the last 4 years. We're now seeing all of those conditions that she put in around Section 60 being removed. And I fear that this isn't about policing, it's about doing over her legacy, and that's very damaging. But
when you talk about, just finally, when you talk about intelligence-led policing, but we know in a lot of these local communities, such as we say communities, just local neighbourhoods, where there are lots of people who are absolutely terrified to leave their homes all hours of the day and night, and terrified of their kids walking to and from school, and the kids are terrified. They're carrying knives, a lot of them, because that's the only way they feel they can be safe. Partly that is because we don't have police officers on the scene, but partly that is because the police officers themselves don't feel safe. We're not going to see intelligence-led policing there with information being fed to the police because no one's talking to the police because there's a total breakdown of trust. How do we repair that? Because it's all very well sending in police officers to be all cuddly and nice, but at the end of the day, if they see crime, they have to act.
You don't repair it by putting Section 60 blanket.
Well, that's why I've asked you. What do you do?
Well, what you do is you go into communities and you talk to them. You invest in youth centres, clubs where police officers can go in and have educational conversations with young people about crime and divert them away from it. You don't do punitive measures. And I have to say, last year, 7,000 people were arrested for knife crime offences. Over 280,000 approximately searches were conducted. That's less than 1% were caught with knives. This is not an effective tool for fighting serious violence.
But hold on a minute. Can I just ask finally? So every time I get on an aeroplane, I somehow always seem to be the person who gets the full search, take the shoes off, take everything off. I have never bombed a plane. I don't think I'm even. If you did profiling, I wouldn't be on the list of people who'd be bombing a plane. I don't consider it to be unreasonable that, despite the fact that the 60 times. Wait, no, Katrina, let me finish. I have to say, as my regular listeners will know, I go on holiday quite a lot. I get a lot of planes. I don't at any point think like I'm being targeted. This is awful. I think it's a little bit silly that I'm being searched, given that I'm not likely to be someone who's probably going to bomb a plane, and very, very few planes have ever been bombed. And yet the entire population of this country, when they get on a plane, faces massive levels of scrutiny, having their bag searched, having their body searched, everything. If we accept that, even to have that tiny chance that a terrorist is going to bomb that plane, we have to go through that. You're saying, only 7,000 out of whatever many tens of thousands searched. I'm thinking that's not such a bad hit rate.
trying to balance the impact that it's having. And this is not something new. The black community, it's been 35 years. For terrorism, it's not even been 11 since 18 since 9/11. I don't think we can compare the two. And if we look at that, actually Liberty went to court and repealed Section 44 because it was being used in a draconian way. So we've already got in the recent history where stop and search legislation has been introduced. It's not been appropriate, not been fit for practice, and the courts have struck it down.
Okay.